And so this is why the work that these people are doing is so important, because money makes the world go round, supposedly. Well, where does it all come from? How is it controlled? How is it created? Who's doing it? And who's getting it? You're going to find out from my brother here, Eggelletion.
We got it. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here today. I almost punked out. I started to stay home because I'm feeling under the weather, cold. But I say, you know something? If Yahweh can make the stellar and ecclesiastical universe, if he can keep these planets in orbit, not bumping each other, and control the finite meanderings of our physical bodies down to the cellular and molecular level, then he can give me the strength to make this trip. Pastor Butch, you are to be commended, sir. I am thoroughly impressed at your work, at the support from all of the people here that have came. This is my first time. I'm a Johnny-come-lately to this whole truth movement in America today. But I'm here to stay, and I will not sell out. Oh, they've tried to get me to sell out. They've harassed me. I've been quietly threatened, but I keep going because I know where my bread is buttered. I know that Yahweh looks after me. Let me say this, Joyce and Dave, I really appreciate you letting me fill in on your show a few weeks ago. That was a lot of fun. I have so much inside of me that I have to get out. And anytime I get the opportunity to let it out, I always welcome it. And I appreciate them allowing me to share my thoughts with their listeners, and they should be commended for it. They've asked me to even run for the presidency of the United States of America. I mean, to me, it's flattering, and it's kind of funny because we all know that I don't stand a snowball's chance in Hades at ever being president of the United States of America. But it's nice to know that people think good of you and people recognize the hard work that you try to do. It's nice, and it gives me all the fuel that I need to keep going. So let me get right to my topic, which is twofold. Number one, I'm the only African American in the history of the United States ever to challenge the privately owned Federal Reserve. The only one. But I can tell you this, I don't believe I'll be the last, and that's the great thing about it. For far too long, as Dave has tried to tell you, they have used, I'm just going to be frank and honest with you, they have used racism to destroy the working class. You don't need me to tell you that to hate somebody because of the color of their skin or because of what their ancestors did hundreds of years ago, and for me to hate their descendants, you don't need me to tell you that that's satanic and evil. I don't have to tell you that. You already know it. A little baby, when it goes to its mother's coffee table and he or she is playing with her whatnots on the table there, that baby has enough God in him to look back over his shoulder and see if anybody's looking. He knows he's doing wrong. Something in us tells us when we're doing right, and something in us tells us when we're doing wrong. We don't need a letter, as Paul said. We don't need an epistle from us. You know, something Joyce was saying when she was having a phone conversation with us about the truth. Spirit is the ultimate source. Spirit is the ultimate source. It's the infinite an immaculate substance from whence everything emanated from, yet abides within. You can't get outside of God to look back at him to see what he looks like. Everywhere you go, you're carrying him there. He lives inside of you. He is what causes you to live, move, and have your being. Yahweh, who I know God is to be, does not have truth. That's what he is. Yahweh does not have love. That's what he is. When Moses was called into the mount to write the 10 Commandment law on tables of stone, 7 laws on one side, 3 on the other. And he came back and he saw how that the children of Israel had corrupted themselves by making idols. Oh, I wish you could see where my mind is right now, because I can see how this is metaphorically applicable to our lives today. When he saw how the children of Israel had corrupted themselves by making idols, that's you giving credit to anything other than God for your life, your strength, your health, your well-being, your peace, your security, your prosperity. When you give credit to anything other than God or Yahweh for that, you have just established an idol. Moses broke those tables of stone. Okay? They never made it into the Ark of the Covenant, those tables of stone. Then God called Moses back up into the mount again. And he said, hew you out 2 more tables of stone, just like the first ones. This time, God himself, with his own finger, wrote that law on those tables of stone. And Moses was able to take those tables of stone and he was able to put it into the Ark of the Covenant, which sat in the tabernacle of Israel. The words, when they are truth, that are spoken unto you by the speakers that get up here on this stage, by those who love the truth and would die for the truth on radio, those words are being written into your consciousness by the finger of God. And no matter what you do or how you try to run from it, you can't escape it. It's written in your heart and mind with the finger of God. You don't believe it? Now, I got to go this way here just for a minute before I jump on the Fed and start raking them through the coals, because they definitely deserve it. Before I start talking about the national security state apparatus in this country, which has done nothing more than generate anti-Americanism all over the world and turned people in less developed countries into haters of you and me. Before I start talking about those things, I got to lay this groundwork here. That tabernacle that Moses was told to build was threefold. Now, it's a strange coincidence that your body, which Paul said, what? Know ye not that your body is the tabernacle of the temple of the Holy Spirit, which you have of Yahweh, and you are not your own. It's a strange coincidence that it's threefold. You are a head cavity, a chest cavity, and an abdominal cavity. 3 cavities, but 1 man. That tabernacle was a most holy place, a holy place, and a court round about. Now, it's a strange coincidence that Ark of the Covenant had 2 archangels overshadowing the mercy seat. One, Gabriel, the other, Michael, a messenger and a warrior. It's a strange coincidence that your brain is divided into 2 halves. One sends messages, and the other causes actions. A messenger and a warrior, your brain. It's a strange coincidence that the pituitary gland secretes 7 hormones out of one side, 3 out of the other. And it governs your growth, reproduction, and metabolism, just like if Israel obeyed that law that Yahweh wrote on tables of stones and had Moses to put in that Ark of the Covenant. If they obeyed that law, they grew, they reproduced, they were able to metabolize, they prospered. If they disobeyed it, it was death unto them. What I'm trying to get you to understand is, as Paul said in the 9th through the 11th chapter of Hebrews when he talked about that tabernacle, he said that this tabernacle serves as a shadow of heavenly things. Study the Mosaic tabernacle. Do that. You'll do yourself well, because it is the definition of the word. Every word has to have a definition. When Moses was atop Mount Sinai for the 40 days and 40 nights, the first 7 days he was there, he saw Elohim create the heavens and the earth. For the next 34 days he was there, he saw the anatomy and the physiology of that tabernacle. He saw Elohim, the ghost-like shape and form of a man having a clear body. And it says, upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he put not his hands. And they ate and they drank with God. Okay? But then some people don't believe that any man has ever seen God at any time. Well, Moses saw him. And he saw how that the tabernacle defined the word or son. Study the tabernacle. Because I want to be a priest of Elohim, officiating in this greater and more perfect tabernacle, which is this universe. I want to be a priest of Yahweh, to tell the truth about the devil, shame him to his face, even if it costs me my life. That's right. You know, in 1913, America ignorantly allowed a handful of men to outsource and privatize its monetary policy. We claim to be a nation who trusts in God. The Bible has laid out the correct path for us to follow. We're supposed to have honesty in our weights and in our measures. You and I both know that there is no silver left in our coins. That's a direct byproduct of us allowing our monetary policy to be outsourced to a group of private, unelected, unaccountable businessmen out for a profit, willing to destroy every living thing on the face of this earth with impunity. That's the direct result of it. So in 1913, we all know the story about the history of the Fed. We know how it came about. You don't need me to tell you about that. We've all have studied that. But look at where we have come since. I want to talk about contemporary Fed policy and what they're doing to you now. How the Federal Reserve is affecting your life today. How the national security state apparatus has divided this country, have defined the way we think for us. They put some of us on the right, some of us on the left, and they are using that polarization of our society to continue to rape, pillage, and plunder this planet and take away the potential for prosperity for you and yours for generations and generations to come. It's time for us to get off of the Republican and the Democrat plantation and get on God's plantation. It's time for us to follow the truth wherever it may lead. It's time. You know, from 1913, when they created the Federal Reserve System, down to 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard, they doubled the money supply only once. Now, the quantity theory of money, they will teach you in any economic school in college about the quantity theory of money. It states, the more money you have in circulation, the less it's going to buy. This is why we're paying so much more for the commodities that are essential commodities. Food, clothing, and shelter. They keep going up every year. It's not that they're going up, it's the purchasing power of our money is going down. From 1913 to 1971, the Federal Reserve doubled the money supply only once. Since 1971 to 2006, you know how many times they've doubled the money supply since they took us off the gold standard, since they got away from a system of honesty in weights and measures, and they have brought the system of the goldsmiths and the money changers on into perdition. You know how many times they've doubled the money supply? 13 times. 13 times. This has destroyed the purchasing power of your money. This is why I have to work 90 hours a week. I host a radio show 7 days a week, and no wonder I stay sick. I host a radio show 5 days a week on the Information Radio Network with Chuck and Larry Bates. Thank God they saw fit to bring me on because, and I got to tell you the story about Air America. You talking about some scumbags? They take the cake, okay? They really, really do. I have to run 3 barbershops. I have a production business where I produce radio commercials, so you can't come into South Florida and turn on your radio station without hearing my custom created jingles and whatnot. And then my father, bless his heart, he's retired. He and my mother moved up to North Florida, and I have to handle his affairs for him. So I put in, my days are generally start around 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't end until around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, every single day of the week. But it's all a labor of love. I love everything that I'm doing because when I'm in my barbershop, I get a chance to talk to little kids. I get a chance to teach them. When I do my radio show, I get a chance to impart knowledge to my listeners that I know the mainstream media doesn't want you to have. So I do that. But they have us all on a treadmill. We're running faster and faster, harder and harder, but we're not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, it seems like sometimes we're going backwards. You know, in 1913, one man working could take care of his family. He could buy the home, the cars, send the family on a vacation, educate his kids out of a professional salary, prior to the Depression. Today it takes 2 people working, and you're barely making the ends meet. I mean, it is almost impossible to make it. I look at the way my father came along. His father was the high sheriff of Jackson County, Florida. He was a white man, and he disowned my father. He wouldn't have anything to do with him. And matter of fact, they used to poke fun at my daddy when he would walk back and forth to town, and Daddy said, I want to have a big family, and I'm not going to treat my kids like that. I'm not going to teach them to be stupid. I'm going to teach them to love all mankind and to be a servant to their fellow man and to love God. And that's what he did. He was able to send 7 kids to college, never stole anything from nobody, never sold anybody any drugs, never did anything dishonest, was able to take care of us, put a roof over our heads. Yeah, most of our clothes came from the Goodwill, but they were clean. And he sent us all to school, and he was able to retire and live comfortable. Got a home sitting on, it's a remarkable story, a remarkable story. To do that today is almost impossible. It's almost impossible. That's how much they have debauched our currency. And it really makes me sick when I hear the talking heads in the news media when Alan Greenspan was getting ready to retire. Try to give this man the credit for single-handedly creating the economic boom of the 1980s and 1990s. Try to give him all the credit for taming inflation and for averting a global economic crisis. When in fact, Mr. Greenspan has left every last one of us a negative savings rate. He has left us insurmountable debts. He's left us record foreign trade imbalances. He's left us, yes, they talk about the economy is growing. Yes, the economy is growing, but what kind of growth is our economy experiencing? There are 2 kinds. There's good growth and there's bad growth. The good growth is based on domestic productivity, creating jobs right here in the United States. Jobs that pay a sustainable wage, where a man can come home to his wife and stand proud that he's able to provide for her and her children. They're taking that away from us. They're turning us all into a nation of baronial serfs. They don't care what color your skin is. They hope you keep caring Because the longer you care and allow that to distract you, the better off they are. The architects of this New World Order have never wanted a nation half slave and half free. They want a nation all slave and none free. And that's what we have degenerated to. We're all 21st century slaves, laboring ever harder on the treadmill. We're having to borrow $3 billion a day from countries in East Asia, $2 billion a day, $2.1 billion a day from the Chinese. Now then, for 50 years, they told us that the Chinese was a communist country and they were our enemy. It was the organizing dynamic behind everything we did for 50 years. But we're borrowing $2 billion. We've mortgaged our futures to them. That's bad economic growth. It's growth that's based on borrowing. It's growth that's based on purely consumption and not a growth that's based on savings. Wherein in China, they have a growth that's based on savings, but they can't consume anything because their money wouldn't buy anything until the trilateral central bankers, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the Asian central banks got together and said, we're going to allow you to peg that yuan to the dollar. Manufacturers all across America put all kinds of pressure on the head of the Treasury, John Snow. First, they were putting pressure on Paul O'Neill's head, and he was going to the Bush administration. He's saying, look, we got to do something about these deficits. We got to stop this borrowing. We got to stop this deficit spending. We're supposed to be the party of conservatism. We're supposed to be the party of thrift. What are you guys doing? Dick Cheney says deficits don't matter. We got the Fed. We can get all the money we want. We got the Chinese. We'll get all the money we want from them. That's bad economic growth. You know good and well you can't borrow your way to financial security as an individual. So how can we borrow our way to financial security as a nation? We cannot do it. They want to credit Alan Greenspan for too much stuff. They credit him for creating the economic boom of the 90s. No, I don't think so. Of course, when you cut interest rates 13 times in January 2001 down to June of 2003, when you cut interest rates down 13 times for a total of 5.5%, and you drop our interest rates all the way down to 1%, people are going to go out and borrow. They're going to borrow like they've lost their minds. And at the same time, this guy had the nerve to talk about irrational exuberance. Well, you created the perfect environment for us to be irrationally exuberant and go out and borrow ourselves into all kinds of trouble. People are using their homes today as an ATM machine. That's bad economic growth. People are using a credit card today in place of a good, steady paycheck. That's bad economic growth. They have set us on a trajectory straight to hell. They know what they're doing. It's malicious, it's evil, and it's wrong, and it's time for us to stand up and say, enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Yes, it was easy for Bill Clinton to create 23 million jobs when Alan Greenspan flooded the economy with so much easy money. People went out and borrowed money and speculated in all kinds of things. Where are those jobs now? They're gone overseas. And what's left, they are bringing cheap labor in from Mexico and Latin America. And let me say this, I'm ashamed of Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson for telling black people in America, you need to ally yourself with the Latino immigrants. Now let me say this, I'm a humanist. I love all mankind. I can't help it, it's a part of my DNA, that's what I was raised in. I love all mankind. If I don't have enough God in me to be patient with you, then how can I expect God to be patient with me in my sins, which are many? I know I ain't what the bird left on the limb. I know it. And you don't have to tell me that. So while I have sympathy for my fellow brothers and sisters, my fellow human beings in Mexico and in Latin America, and I definitely have sympathy for them because they have experienced the failure of the Washington Consensus for 2 decades. We have loaned these countries money and given them stipulations upon paying it back that we know they can't live up to. They've been required to give 75% of their gross domestic product back to the international bankers as debt service. What does that leave for building a self-sustaining socioeconomic infrastructure in their countries? What does that leave for them having any hope of economic autonomy in their countries? It leaves nothing. They are slaves. This was planned. This didn't happen by accident. The privatization of their resources, the liberalization of their capital and financial markets. In other words, you got to open up your banking system, and you got to open up your whole financial system to Western control, because you don't have sense enough to run it for yourself. So you'll let us control it, and we'll run it in the ground better than you ever could. And the very draconian or the extremely harsh austerity that was put on those people, 75% of your GDP, we want it back as debt service. People can't make it. Consequently, their economies have been asphyxiated. They're done. Can you blame them for hating America when that's what we have imposed on them? And you and I, ignorantly, have given our consent to these lending practices in our hemisphere, and it has done nothing but generate anti-Americanism to our neighbors south of our border. But we want to go halfway around the world and impose democracy and do nation building over there. And our neighbors to our own backyard, we have caused them to suffer, and their economies have been asphyxiated to the point that now we have an influx of refugees coming into the United States. Now, let's just be honest and call them what they are. They are trespassers. They are trespassing on U.S. soil, but they're doing it out of a sense of intense desperation. They don't have anything there. So while I am sympathetic for them, you know, I got to look out for home first. I got to look out for home first. I understand what the word illegal means. I understand what against the law means. You can't come into the United States unless you do it legally. The president wanted us to be afraid of Islamist, radical, terrorist organizations. Fine, we're afraid. How about protecting our borders, Mr. President? He won't do it. Why? Because for 20 years, through that Washington Consensus, lend them money, get them addicted to it. When they can't pay it back, then we'll absorb the illegal immigrants into our country. It's a wage reduction tool in America. They're bringing wages down. And let me say this. I don't know whether or not my good white brothers and sisters in here realize this or not, or know this or not, but by 2050, you will be the minority in America. You will be the minority. America will be 51% black and brown, primarily brown, and it will be 49% white. All of the liberal elements in America will be running this country from there on in. They're going to run this country, the whole show. It's a done deal. It is a done deal. So, and all of this stuff had its genesis in our petroleum policies, believe it or not. It all had its genesis in our petroleum policies. That's why in this book here, where the right went wrong on national security and the left too, I devoted a whole chapter to dealing with U.S. presidential policies on strategic petroleum reserves. Some of the older members of the audience remember the time when America was the #1 oil supplier for the rest of the world. We supplied the world with most of its oil. We still have plenty of oil in the United States. Don't let anybody fool you. We still have plenty of oil. And if they really wanted to make gas cheap for us, why don't they, since we're supposed to be under this free market ideology, why don't they allow you or I to own refineries and build the refineries necessary to be able to refine more oil to bring the price of gas down? It's all a plan, y'all. It's all a plan. And Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, before I forget them, I got to finish on them. They want, now you got 37 million black people in the United States right now. There are 42 million Hispanics and Latinos documented, probably about 25 to 30 million undocumented. They say there's 11 to 12. Whatever they tell you, just double it, okay? You know, that brings the number of Latino and Hispanic people living in the United States up to about 60 million. Under the amnesty bill, and that's exactly what it is, Lou Dobbs is right on that one. It is amnesty coming out of the Senate, and what the president is pushing for, and I part ways with the Democratic Party. It's amnesty of what they're offering these people. You don't reward somebody for breaking your laws. You don't do that, but that's exactly what they're going to do. When they pass this bill, all these illegal immigrants living in the United States will be given citizenship. It may take a while, but they will be able to earn citizenship. It's not feasible to round them all up and send them back because the border insecure, they'd just be right back in here tomorrow. And at more than the entire budget for the Office of Homeland Security, it's just one more wasteful expenditure that I say don't waste any more of my money. You're wasting enough as it is. I work hard to pay my taxes. Shouldn't be paying them. I put it like this, I work hard to let you steal from me. Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton were very adamant about allowing blacks to vote in New Orleans. The black people that were displaced there. I applaud them for that effort. Everybody should have the right to vote. Yeah, no problem with that. But at the same time, you've destroyed the leverage of the African American in this country to be able to advance his agenda politically by increasing the Latino population threefold almost overnight. Those guys are two bought-off agents of the system. Well, I'm quite sure they won't like me saying that, but that's what they act like sometimes. That's what they act like sometimes. And let me say this. You already can't earn enough on your job. If wages go any lower, it's going to take not only the husband and the wife, but all the kids working just to barely make ends meet in America. If they continue this wage reduction initiative that's underway in the United States right now, we're in trouble. Now let me go back to this oil policy, because unless you understand this, you will not understand our foreign policy. You won't. You got to be able to understand this. Everything we do is organized around oil because that's the paradigm in which our economy operates. It operates under a petroleum-based paradigm. Roosevelt realized in 1945 that if we continue to be the world's oil supplier, sooner or later we would compromise our oil reserves. So let's find some proxies. He signed a deal with the House of Saud in February of 1945 to allow them to be the proxy supplier for American oil interests around the world. Now, it's not just our consumption of oil that they were interested in. If you'll read Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, he plainly tells you how that the diffusion of the cultural elements of the core society, which was Europe, has always been controlled by that core society so that they can be able to exploit and profit off of the industrialization of all the peripheral societies. In other words, for China, for instance, we allowed them to have the agricultural revolution before they got the transportation revolution. You can grow your own products, but you won't be able to market them unless you come through us. The rate, pace, and sequence of the diffusion of elements from the core society has always been manipulated and controlled so as to subdue and enslave all the peripheral societies. Oil is one of those elements. Oil is one of those elements. So Roosevelt contracted with the Saudis and he said, look, we're going to protect you. We'll give you all the protection you want because we know the rest of the Arab countries are going to hate you for dibbling and dabbling with the West and for becoming a pro-Western regime. They're going to hate you, so we'll protect you. Right then and there, we joined ourselves at the hip to the volatility and chaos of the Middle East and have been there since 1945. But the sad thing about it, the Saudi royals are not with us. They're not our friends. They're not our friends, but not in any stretch of the imagination are they our friends. My mind right now is going back to 1973 with the OPEC embargo, when they created OPEC. You know, it was created to give them a little bit more political leverage against the industrialized countries of the Western world. And they created an oil embargo and put this country in one of the worst economic recessions that we've seen since 1929. Anyway, Eisenhower came along with his doctrine. First, it was Truman. By this time, the Cold War was settling into a very fragile and tense coexistence. And Truman said, we must protect these oil resources, and we must control these oil resources and keep the Soviet Union from getting them. Eisenhower came in and beefed it up and said, yes, we'll do that, and we'll do it by any means necessary. By the time Jimmy Carter got in there, and Richard Nixon, no longer would we depend on proxy police to protect our oil interests in the Middle East. By the time Jimmy Carter became president, I'll never forget his farewell address. He said, let me make myself perfectly clear. Any outside source seeking to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault upon the United States, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. In other words, we weren't going to depend on the Brits to protect our oil interests in the Middle East anymore. We would do it ourselves. Since that time, our military has been designed and geared not to protect America from any strategic threat, but to protect the pipelines. Oil is the central organizing dynamic behind everything we do. Now you've got Hugo Chavez down in Venezuela, who is now actually challenging Saudi Arabia for dominance in OPEC. And we need the oil coming from Venezuela and South America and Mexico and Canada so bad that we have allowed the Monroe Doctrine to be rendered null and void. Anybody can come into the Western Hemisphere and, like the Chinese and the Russians right now, drilling for oil off the coast of Florida, but we can't drill. Petrogeologists have already discovered that there is an oil reserve in Colorado to rival that of the Saudis and that of Venezuela. But we won't drill. We won't use ours. We won't tap our reserve. We want to use up everybody else's first. And we have to just deal with the political byproducts. We have to deal with the geostrategic byproducts of this as they begin to materialize. This is crazy. It's an insane policy. What started out in 1947 with the passage of the National Security Act, wherein we dissolved the Office of Strategic Services and we created the Central Intelligence Agency in that year, 1947. We created the National Security Council. It started out as a civilian advisory committee to the president. It has morphed and evolved into the command post for all kinds of covert black operations which have been illegally backdoored out of every White House since 1947. Every one of them, Democrat and Republican. And what you need to understand is when the president invokes national security, the Constitution is put on the back burner. The will of Congress doesn't matter anymore, and the will of the American people doesn't matter. We have, thanks to the National Security Act of 1947, we have an imperial presidency in America. We live in a country wherein we have a totalitarian dictator sitting in the White House. And none of us is brave enough to call it for what it is. That's exactly what's going on. In 1953, Iran had a democratically elected president. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. This man's only crime was that he nationalized the oil fields that were run by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which went on to become BP. He nationalized those oil fields. In other words, he took control of the oil fields. He wanted his people to have the benefits of the profits from his own resources. Well, the European and American oil cartels weren't going to stand for that. So what did they do? They labeled him the antithetical enemy of America at that time, which was a communist, today is a terrorist. They labeled him a communist, and they overthrew this man's country. They implemented a coup d'etat, a coup by proxy. They funded counterfeit mobs in the street, and they overthrew the government of Mohammed Mossadegh. Now I ask you, this was in Iran in 1953. It's not difficult to draw a line from 1953 down to 1979 to the Khomeini Revolution, wherein they took hostages for 444 days, American hostages. Not easy. It's not very difficult to draw a line from 53 to 79. It's not difficult for us to understand why the Iranians don't trust America's notion of democracy when we subverted a fledgling democracy in their own country, and then turned around and did the same thing. Now, they wanted Truman to sign off on that in 1953, but because it was an election year, and only because it was an election year, Truman didn't do it. Truman had signed off on something far more sinister than that a few years prior, wherein right after World War II, when the Nazis were no longer our enemy, but now the communists were our enemy, Truman signed off on a project called Operation Paperclip, wherein they brought in Nazi war criminals into the United States, put them to work in the biological and chemical weapons areas of our country. Out of that, we've got a host of immune system compromising viruses that they're spraying in the air and everything else. Aerosols, they could skeet into a mall and give everybody in there the flu for I don't know how long. Okay? They put them to work in aerospace. Men like Wernher von Braun, who developed the V-2 rocket that killed scores of allies and innocent civilians in World War II. We made him the head of NASA. And he developed the Saturn V rocket that sent Neil Armstrong to the moon, wherein he probably should have stood trial for war crimes in Nuremberg. Men like Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Leon. Truman allowed those men to come into the United States. Why? The Nazis weren't our enemy anymore. Now it's the Soviets, it's the communists. So we'll forget about that and we'll utilize them as long as we can to get whatever information. So Allen Dulles, who was the earlier director of the CIA, got together with Reinhard Gehlen, who was Hitler's intelligence chief, and they sanitized the dossiers of all of these war criminals and brought them into the United States. So the only reason Truman didn't sign off on Operation Ajax and get rid of Mossadegh in Iran in '53 was because it was an election year. Well, Ike won, and now that he was a newly elected president, let's go ahead and advance our agenda. See, this stuff has been picking up pace every year. That's why you're seeing this president do more stuff unilaterally, more stuff preemptively at a faster pace. It's increasing. Why? They see us on their heels. They see us that we have, as they say in the ghetto, we have peeped their game. We have peeped their little hole card, and we're starting to spread the word. And before we go out and lynch them, they want to hurry up and impose this new world order on us as fast as they possibly can. So that's why they're doing all of this outlandish stuff so fast. So Ike signed off on Operation Ajax, and he got rid of Mossadegh. 1954, he signed off on getting rid of Hoboko Arbenz in Guatemala. This man's only crime was that he nationalized land that was owned by the United Fruit Company, of which the Bush family was principal shareholders at that particular time. He nationalized land that was owned by the United Fruit Company, and he wanted to turn that land back over to the peasant farmers in Guatemala so they wouldn't have to leave Guatemala and come to the United States looking for a job. They could have a job right there at home. Well, United Fruit Company couldn't stand for it, and all the rest of America's corporate agribusiness giants, they couldn't stand for it. So what did they do? They labeled him a communist, and they overthrew his regime. Same thing, another coup by proxy. They did it in Chile in 1973. They did it in Honduras in the 1980s with the Iran-Contra affair. You know, I did call this book Where the Right Went Wrong and the Left Too. I want to read something to you. I should have, oh, well, man, isn't God wonderful? I just flipped it up and it came right to the page where I wanted to quote from. That's amazing. Thank you, boss. I appreciate that. This book is called Where the Right Went Wrong and the Left Too. When Iran-Contra was going on, yes, the Reagan-Bush White House had become compromised, but they compromised the office of the governor, Bill Clinton, in Arkansas too. I see I got about 5 more minutes. And they were bringing drugs, plane load after plane load after plane load of cocaine into the United States for sale on the streets in the United States of America. Now, they had one old reporter whose name was Sarah McClendon. When Bill Clinton first became president, this was in 1994, October of 1994, who had the guts. I guess she said, well, I'm so old, if they shoot me now, it ain't going to make any difference anyway. My days are numbered. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get him. I'm going to put him on Front Street. And that's exactly what she did. She put Bill Clinton on Front Street. And she asked him about the drug running that was going on in Mena, Arkansas at that time. And I'm going to quote to you her remarks. She said, "Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States, and they took the money, and they brought weapons, and they took them back to the Contras. All of this was illegal under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be done in the name of national security?" Now, before I quote to you what Clinton said, keep in mind, every time they invoke that, national security, you can just take the Constitution and ball it up and put it in the garbage because it doesn't mean anything anymore. Every time they invoke national security, Congress may as well take a vacation because their consent is no longer heard. The American people's will is totally disregarded in the name of national security. And in so many times, seems like, because I studied this stuff. You know, I did my research. I went through all the black operations that have been done out of these White Houses on the left and on the right. And every time, the things that they were doing in the name of national security made us less secure. And they did nothing more than facilitate corporate greed. The national security state is just a bigger threat to our liberty in this country as the Federal Reserve ever hoped to be. It's terrible, and it needs to be reined in. Anyway, Bill Clinton, I have written here, he said, I say, appearing calm, but definitely bothered that this elderly reporter would ask a question so sensitive to national security, the president answered, and I quote, "Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries, and it was found primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based upon what was in the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under the jurisdiction of the United States attorneys appointed successively by previous administrations. We, in the state of Arkansas, had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's looked into it knows that." Well, you know something? He was lying and telling the truth at the same time, because, no, he didn't have anything to do with an investigation of it, even though he was asked to by the local prosecutor, Charles Black, in rural Polk County, Arkansas. He asked Bill Clinton for $20,000 to conduct an investigation because he knew they didn't have the money to go up against the CIA. Bill Clinton never gave him a dime. So his claim that the state had next to nothing to do with it was absolutely right. But don't you think for a minute that Bill Clinton wasn't aware that his state was being used as a staging ground for the sale of cocaine here in the United States of America, which destroyed the lives, physically, emotionally, economically, and even spiritually, of literally millions of American people. Don't you think for a minute he didn't know? These people don't have a sense of patriotism. These people don't have a sense of nationalism. These people don't have a sense of humanism. These people are plutocrats. A plutocrat is someone who is interested in promoting a government of, by, and for the rich. And you and this Constitution is the only thing that stands in their path and permitting and preventing them from achieving that very pernicious goal of enslaving everything on the face of this earth. We have a charge to keep, y'all. Whether we want to accept it or not, whether we know it or not, we have a charge to keep. Everybody that's here today, I firmly believe that you love your country. I know I do. I loved America when America didn't love me, and I die for America in a heartbeat. I will stay true to the creed that is written in the noble documents of the founding of this country. That's the only way we're going to survive, is if we all stay true to those things. We all have to stay true. We all have to fight. You know, stop believing the pablum, stop believing the lies. You know, they credit Alan Greenspan with taming inflation. That's a lie. When Greenspan took over the Fed, Paul Volcker was the chairman of the Federal Reserve before him. When he first took over the Fed, inflation was running around 12%. Now, by the time Volcker got out of there in 8 years, inflation was brought down to 4%. Now, granted, for 17 years, Greenspan kept inflation between 2.5% and 5% for 17 years. He did it by turning on the liquidity pump. He did it by creating an economic environment of our country that can only be described as one of multiple asset bubbles. You have a bubble in the housing market, you have a bubble in bonds, you have a bubble in stocks. And let me say this. Greenspan has forced us into a situation now because Bernanke's biggest challenge is how to increase the savings rate in America. 77 million baby boomers are going to retire in 2 years. They're all going to have their hands stuck out. Where's my check? The government has spent the money. Congress can't keep their grubby little fingers off that money. It was all lumped into the General Treasury Fund, and they've spent that money on all kinds of wasteful pork barrel projects. Bridges to nowhere, $75,000 for a hammer, and all that disinformation campaigns against people like my good friend Dave Von Kleist. This is where your money is going. Wars and proxy wars throughout the Cold War that has cost us dearly, both in terms of our prestige and in terms of our GDP. It's cost us dearly. So he has put us in a situation wherein if we want to retire today, if your children who you love and you send into school, you say you love America, that means you love the people of this country, you know, as well as the dirt. You want your children to be able to retire one day? Unless you labor in preparation for your own suicide, you won't even be able to retire. Now, if that's not a oxymoron, I've never heard one. But all of the investing in the 21st century is going into Southeast Asia, it's going into China, and it's going into India. China right now is using up 70% of all the crude oil coming out of the Middle East. They're using 40% of the world's cement, 26% of the world's steel, 21% of the world's aluminum, and about 31% of the world's iron. All of the commodities that are the prerequisite for the industrialization of China and Asia is where you should be invested right now. Not in these stocks, your overstock.com, Google, eBay. Google hit over $600 a share. You're going to lose your shirt in that stuff when these corrections come about. And they're going to come about because Bernanke has no choice but to keep raising interest rates to protect the dollar. If he stops raising interest rates, the dollar will not be attractive enough to attract $3 billion a day in foreign capital from China and other countries. And we need that money. That money is paying for these mortgages in America today. So he's put you into a situation where unless you really get serious and start investing in gold and silver, start investing in natural gas, oil, and for God's sake, get some uranium. Because we're building 100 nuclear reactors in China and India, which is intensifying the geopolitical antagonism between those two countries. I can't even, that's another whole story. I mean, only thing we do is generate chaos. But uranium has to go up. They don't mine it enough. I'm out of time. I'm out of time. Please, thank you. Thank you. Tune into my show. My show airs every day from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My website is www.butch, talktoandre.com. That's talktoandre.com. I have some cards over at the table. I'd be happy to give you a card that has the information how you can log on to my show. And we will continue this discussion then. May God bless every last one of us. May Yahweh always keep the winds at our backs and love in our heart, and let us never, ever stop loving one another in this country. And God will bless us, and he will restore our sovereignty. He will restore our peace. He will restore our stability if we trust him. Thank you.
Andre.